Signore e signori, buonasera. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò. It's a great pleasure to welcome back Nicola Gardini for the presentation of his latest book, Lacuna. I'm going to introduce our three guests, and then I'm going to leave the floor to them. They also happen to be three good friends, so I could even close my iPad to present them, and I'll do it. Lina Bolzoni is a professor of Italian and comparative literature at the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa. She was also the dean of the class of letters for the Scuola Normale Superiore, I think the first woman to ever held that title. And per adesso. Per adesso. And she's also a member of the Accademia dei Lincei. But we are also very proud that Professor Bolzoni is a recurrent global visiting professor here at New York University. That means that we can count on her at regular intervals, and that really creates a wonderful relationship between our Department of Italian Studies, especially the graduate program, and the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa, that, as you might know, is the most prestigious graduate school in Italy. Professor Bolzoni's research concentrates on the Renaissance, and she also curates a very important archive of images that sorts of bridges the gap between the visual arts and literature at the Scuola Normale. She recently curated a beautiful exhibit dedicated to Ariosto, and the images related to Ariosto, everything from contemporary paintings to figurine to puppets and much more. Her work concentrates on the study of memory and the art of memory in a variety of different ways. Her books have been translated in English, French, Spanish, and Japanese. Giusto, Lina? Okay. And on the other side, we have Martino Marazzi, who is a professor of Italian literature at the University of Milan. And we also are lucky enough to have him on the faculty of the Department of Italian Studies this semester as Tiro Segno visiting professor in Italian American Studies. The academic interests of Professor Marazzi are very wide and broad. I would simplify them in two categories, two main categories. One is Italian literature of the 19th century connected to the Risorgimento, and the other one, it's a very prolific part of his career that is dedicated to the literary production of the Italian Americans, especially of the first generations of Italian Americans. He published extensively criticism and a very interesting anthology of these first writers that is also a brilliant and amusing read for all of us. Right now he's teaching two courses, one undergraduate course and one graduate course on Italian American literature here with us. And in the middle we have Nicola Gardini. Nicola Gardini has a PhD from New York University, we can say very proudly, so he's an alumnus of NYU, and here we have one of his mentors, Professor Daniel Javic from Comparative Literature, with whom Nicola studied when he was here at NYU. I have some problem introducing Nicola because every time I see him, he's doing something new, so he is a professor at Oxford University of Italian and comparative literature with an emphasis in the Renaissance. He is a writer of fiction. I romanzi sono già 4, 5. There are 5 novels, 5.5 if we consider The Girl a full-fledged romanzo. Is that the half of the...
Oh, no, that will make it 7 then.
7. He's a poet, and he just published a collection of his poems in Italian, but Nicola also published poems in ancient Greek with meter, and in his own native dialect of Petacciato, a small town in the Molise. So from ancient Greek to Italian, to the dialect of his mother's land, to English. He's a very accomplished literary translator. He translated from Catullo to Emily Dickinson. He curated the Meridiano Mondadori of Ted Hughes. He started even painting, and he had a very successful exhibit last year in Milan, and now he took up photography very successfully as well. So I think in him, the border between the Renaissance scholar and the Renaissance man is very thin, and he's really pushing it every time more. Tonight, we are presenting Nicola's book, Lacuna, that I believe was born somehow in New York while you were a fellow at the American Academy for Italian Studies.
Italian Academy.
Italian Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
And somehow, maybe I'm wrong, but it can be read alongside with one of your novels, memoir, Lo Sconosciuto, where you encounter the theme of the lacuna in a sort of scientific, neuroscientific way, whereas here you concentrate on the more literary aspects of it. But I remember when your research was starting, you were trying already to establish a connection between the scientific, the neuroscientific lacuna, and the literary lacuna.
Well, yes, Stefan, I'm very grateful for...
And I'm done, so I leave it to you, you decide.
No, but I probably speak last, because... But I will pick on just what we'll resume this statement that you just made. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess you have to let us speak a little bit, otherwise, no. after you, there won't be much to say. So I'm starting telling a few things that I thought about this extraordinary book, which comes out in the very prestigious series of Einaudi, which is diminutively called A Piccola Biblioteca. In fact, as we know, the Piccola Biblioteca Einaudi really publishes great essays by great essayists. And I think it is a serendipitous coincidence, but Nicola's book comes third in a series of very recent great essays, which came out this year. The first one by Enrico Testa is a really groundbreaking study, which is called Italiano Nascosto. It's a completely new take on the history of Italian language. And the second one, which came out only a few weeks ago, is the collection of all the writings of the great master Jean Starobinsky on melancholy. And in a way, Gardini's book is as well learned, scholarly, very well researched and crafted, and at the same time as essayistic as, in different ways, both of these texts. It's an extremely dense book packed with great musings and considerations and analysis of great works of art, of great works of fiction. To summarize it in a nutshell, I think it is a book about what's lacking and what's missing in great fiction. And what is it that what's lacking and what's missing defines great fiction as such? By the way, the words lacking and missing are almost a para or false, falsely etymologically linked to lacuna, but neither of them actually has the same Latin root. But I think they resonate with a similar meaning. In fact, one of the main concepts that the book revolves around is not exactly what is missing, but what is omitted by the authors of great fiction. We're talking about novels, short stories, and the greatest stories of the Western canon, really, from the Greek up to Sebald and even authors closer to us. It's as if Gardini explores the galaxy or the universe of Western fiction and infers the existence of black holes. In fact, the black hole is also on the cover, I think not by chance, by Malevich. So these black holes are constitutionally a part of fiction. I was reminded of many things reading this book. One is, for instance, a great masterpiece of literary criticism and comparative literature, which was published about 15 years ago and quite recently translated in English by another great professor from the Normale di Pisa, Francesco Orlando, Gli oggetti desueti nella letteratura, the obsolete objects. In a similar way, Gardini has taken almost obsessively, as he says at the beginning, io sono innamorato della parola lacuna, that's how the book starts. He followed this very productive and interesting and inspiring obsession, and through that, like Orlando with his obsolete objects, and through that really has given us a fresco of the Western canon. I was also reminded of, at some point it came to my mind, this great line by Montale, which goes, felicità raggiunta, per te si cammina sul fil di lama. You know, happiness is achieved by walking on the edge of a knife blade. Why felicità? Why happiness? I think Gardini has treaded on this fil di lama, on this knife's blade, and being the exceptional scholar that he is, he has crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, and felicità means this. I would make a comparison between Montale and another great poet, although a painter poet who uses a similar image, Paul Klee, who has a whole series of paintings on what he calls das Fruchtfeld, or what Pierre Boulez, who's one of his greatest admirers, has called le pays fertile. Now, there's a fertility, the felicitous fertility of a text able to release and to produce pleasure. I think that is at the bottom the meaning of Lacuna. It's a way of producing pleasure onto the reader, because the laguna needs us to go to Venice, but the lacuna needs the readers to cooperate and collaborate with the text in order to make sense of it. And so lacuna is the exact opposite of a sign of defeat, but it's the felicitous void, the happy void, if you wish, or the fertile void that stimulates the reader to an experience of fullness. The experience of fullness in many ways. It helps us understand not only what is there, but what is not there, what is said, and what is not said. And by what is not said, how we make sense of the story and of the meaning, especially of the characters. This is a great book which analyzes characters and the greatest characters of Western literature. Ultimately, Lacune collaborate not only, it is a blind spot, the Laguna, that enriches us as readers and makes us wiser. Literature, and this is a recurring motive in Gardini, literature is a form of knowledge. It's a form of knowledge, and it's a form of also being morally committed to know, and to know precisely, and to know well. So Lacuna collaborate not only morally but also logically, and as Gardini says explicitly at some point, gnoseologically, in making literature a complex field of knowledge. Lacunas are of many different kinds, of which I'll let the author speak about, but they also involve and revolve around the challenge, and this is at the core of the book, of fully articulating one's identity. As a matter of fact, at the very center of the book, there's a masterful analysis of Oedipus' enigma. And in so being is also a way of stimulating both the author and the reader in gaining a form of truth. In a way, I think we could call the Lacuna the Oedipian complex at the root of literary creativity. Another theme which is central to this book is the relation between realism and fiction. Yeah, which is no small deal for literary analysis. In order to make sense of this book, I found myself also jotting down a number of polarities or binarisms, which I think help me, at least, to make sense of the richness of this analysis. And Lacuna, or the Lacuna making of literature, somehow is in the middle of these two polarities. Polarities like veiling and unveiling, memory and oblivion. Great analysis of Primo Levi's recalling of Dante, of Ulysses Dante in Auschwitz. Realism and truth. Emotion and analysis, and or imagination and rationality. There's also a very interesting section in which two great authors, almost contemporary authors, are compared. Conan Doyle on the one hand, Marcel Proust on the other. Thickness and thinness, what is condensed and what is seemingly superficial, clear. Chekhov and the minimalists. The role of attention and the role of apparent absent-mindedness, of meticulous planning and chance. I'm about to end, but in remembering that one of the previous great books by Gardini was about the Renaissance, in which he discusses at length the origins, also the historiographical origins of the Renaissance, with great discussions, for instance, on Burckhardt. So I thought, if we were, in a way, this is a timeless book. You know, it's a book which opens up a completely new perspective, and I think we'll go back to it time and again, not only in order to analyze those specific texts, but also to interrogate ourselves about our own experiences as reader with new texts. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking, you know, I've been here in New York for a few months now, and being in this great city, stimulated by all sorts of things, I happened to, in the last only couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, to reread or to read texts and books and novels of a completely different kind. One of my favorite Russian contemporary writers, Sergei Dovlatov, who is a sort of a follower of Chekhov, a great Somali novelist, Nuruddin Farah, who writes a great novel on present-day Mogadishu through Dante's Inferno. And I just went a couple of days ago to see this incredibly annoying but very interesting movie, last movie by Godard, which is entitled Goodbye to Language. What more lacune than that? And so lacune resonate all through these very different texts. Maybe Burckhardt, of Renaissance fame, could have called this book, I think, the first, at least that I know, the first attempt of a Geistesgeschichte des Lehrers. I don't know, you know, like a spiritual history, very broad history of the void, of the functional role of emptiness in a text, in all its forms, in all its meaning of desire and longing, of disaffection, of failure, of missed opportunities, and also an essay on how to achieve a literary pleasure homeopathically by inserting signs of the opposite kind, signs of erasure, or as Gardini also says, I think, quoting Stendhal, or signs of rature, of erasure. So, this is pretty much what I thought about this book.
Thank you very much, Martino.
I think that.
And I have a few questions later. But
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
It's your turn.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a great pleasure for me to discuss a book that has a very long story, and a story that I could observe in different times. I remember in 2005, here in New York, at the Italian Academy, when Nicola presented his research, and more recently in 2013 in Sarzana, Festival della Mente. So it's a book with a very long story, and I think, and Nicola wrote this in his book, that in these long years the book changed, but in the same time it remained faithful to the importance of the theme, of the idea, the importance of Lacuna, as we heard. And the importance of thinking about what is not told in the literature, first of all in the novel, but not only. And it's a book that has many different perspectives, many different components. There is also a kind of autobiographical origin that Stefano mentioned, because it's linked to the novel about the terrible experience of the illness of Nicola's father. So there is this first dimension, this is the first origin, I think, but also it's a book that becomes, it seems to me, more and more ambitious, because it's a kind of manifesto on the essence of literature, on the importance of literature in the life, and in our fight in the attempt to give a meaning to our life, to try to put together, to unify the fragments. And this is a very important theme, not only here, but, for example, in the book already mentioned on Renaissance. And it happened to me to read very recently some parts of St. Augustine Confessiones. And it's interesting to see how this theme, to unify the fragments, is so important in St. Augustine, but of course in Patriarch and so on. So it's a great, great theme. And the Lacuna is also a reflection on this. So the idea is that Lacuna is a very specific topic, it's a very specific rhetorical tool, but it's also something that opens perspectives, opens more general perspective. And I like it also, this idea that to write literature, to read literature, is also a very basic, is something that we need. It's something very, very natural. And I think this is very important also for our academic work. I mentioned the idea that reading, writing means also to try to unify fragments, and it's linked with the idea that Nicola says that it's a kind of what happened in the life when we try to make some unification, a narration of the different fragmented moment, or also in order to fight against the death, against the fear of the death. So my first question for Nicola is exactly, I would like if it tells us something about the story of the book, and if he agrees with this more general perspective. And my second question, my second note is about the structure of the book. I think that write a book about Lacuna is a kind of challenge because it's a book on the black holes, as we have heard, and so it's a kind of, it's a challenge, like if you have to write a book on nothing, on the Nihilo, and there are some treatises on this subject, or on silence. And it's interesting that also these themes are present in the books. And I was thinking of one of the incredible number of texts that are mentioned in this book, Tesauro della dissimulazione onesta, when the author speaks about dissimulazione and he says dei più grandi simulatori non sappiamo niente. So it's a kind of oxymoron, I mean. And I think that the idea of writing a book on Lacuna is a kind of oxymoron. It's really a challenging work. And the book wants not to be a chronology, but, as we have heard, has a very large temporal dimension, because we find ancient authors. Nicola remembers that he comes from classical studies, so we find a very interesting quotation from Greek and Latin authors, first of all, of the great theorists of rhetoric and poetry. And it's very challenging to see how many of these quotations are still very, very important, very, very smart, very useful for us. And there are many, many very important analyses of great narrations of the 19th and 20th century. Not also great authors like Stendhal, Balzac, James, Virginia Woolf, etc., 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 but also some very interesting analysis of detective story like Sherlock Holmes or Maigret in Simenon. And this is also very interesting for me. I mean, how Nicola puts together the great author of the great author of the canon and the detective story. That is a very important point of his book. So, coming back to the problem of the structure, I think that it was not easy to find a structure for this research. because we have a kind of great web of quotation, and quotation is also one of the themes of the book. And it seems to me that the theme of the book and the structure of the book, in a certain sense, are mirroring each other. But in the same time, so we have this web of quotation, but in the same time, we have an attempt to find a structure. And I would like to hear something more about this. I think that this is a very important point because as the other books by Nicola, we have here rich research, but we have here also the pleasure of narrating the research, the pleasure of communicating this adventure that is inside the book. And the last point that has been mentioned is the reader, because we know that the complicity of the reader in the creation of the text is a very important topic of some modern theory. For example, the theory of reception of constant school in Hans Robert Jauss or in Wolfgang Iser. And in the same time, we can see, as I mentioned before, that this theme is very recently, is very important, but it's also a very ancient theme. This is very interesting for me. And also another point very interesting for me, and I agree with Nicola, is that the theory can be important. The theory can give some perspectives, can suggest some questions. But first of all, what is important is to read the text, is to have this very close relationship with the text. But I would like to underline that, as I told before, Lacuna is a very specific rhetorical tool, but in the same time, for example, from this perspective of the complicity that is asked to the reader, the Lacuna help us to focus on a more general problem. I mean, Lacuna is a very specific way of asking the attention, the complicity, and the pleasure of the reader. And I mentioned that it's interesting to think, of course, of Jauss, of Iser, of modern theorists, but what is interesting is to find also quotation from authors. And we have been discussing with Nicola this quotation from Lawrence Stern, from the Life and Opinion of Tristram Shandy, where he says that Lacuna is necessary, like in a dialogue, like in a conversation, because we have to leave space to the other. So this idea of relationship between writing and reading, like a dialogue, like a conversation, is very, very interesting. I think that it's another absolutely central point already mentioned. It's the relationship between reality and fiction. And I think that a point that is made is very essential, that we have to believe in the text, because this is a part of the pleasure of the text. And I recently visited in Baltimore an exhibit on fakes, lies, and forgeries. And I was thinking that also the construction of fakes is a kind of, sometimes not, of course, but sometimes can be also a proof of the necessity of believing in the reality. So you need, for example, that Laura really wrote letters to Petrarch. You believe that the text continue outside the text. And I think that this tension between the consciousness that the novel, of course, is fiction, but also that you are invited to believe when you read to the reality is very important. And I would like to finish with a quotation from the book. A quotation of many possible quotations about the participation of the reader, about the pleasure of knowledge created by literature and by Lacuna. And I would like to read a passage that comes from a quotation from Quintilian on amputate sentenze. This image of the text as a body is very important. It's also an interest that is present in the book on Renaissance. So Quintilian is discussing Seneca, and he opposes the success among cultivated people and among young people. And I quote Nicola: sarebbe utile capire se proprio la giovinezza non sia in qualunque epoca la più adatta ad apprezzare le scorciature e le omissioni, la giovinezza che ha bisogno di verità, di essenzialità, di sentirsi partecipe. And I would like to ask Nicola if he felt himself as a young man when he chose this topic and he wrote this book. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both Lina and Martino, and thank you everyone for coming. Thank you very much, Stefano, for once again having me here. And it's a great pleasure to be among friends, to be in New York, and to be with people who've witnessed this long story of mine. Because, as Stefano was mentioning, the book started being written here, actually in 2005, when I was a fellow at the Italian Academy. But the project had been in my mind for years, and I do say something about the project in the very book at the end, because it all started with a fascination, as is often the case with all types of researchers, with the word Lacuna and with some aspects of omissive narratives. Coming from the classics, I mean, having taken a degree in classics, in Milan, Lacuna is a word I've always been exposed to. I've always dealt with holes in texts, with incomplete narratives or poetry. So it's something that I'd always had in me, in myself. When I saw it in myself, it was a great moment. It was a discovery of, it was like, finding a piece of my life, really, before even I started writing anything. I think that what really prompted me to want to start a book on this was my father's Alzheimer's. I was very close to my family, not that much to my father as an individual, but indeed we got closer when he became ill. Because I was not too sentimentally involved for lack of, closeness, I could observe his disease quite objectively with a lot, of course, of pity and suffering, but also with a lot of intellectual curiosity. It was very interesting to see how the disease was dismantling what had appeared to be a very complete structure. That is, a man's language, a man's memory, a man's biography. And the disease seemed to me to be doing things that literature does. The disease was suddenly juxtaposing things that you wouldn't otherwise see together. The disease was creating interesting metaphors. The disease was surprising me with unexpected and amazing discoveries. Of course, it all was happening the other way around. My father was not constructing anything, he was actually losing a lot. But if you just took the instant, the snapshot, two snapshots, you needed what? Two, of course, to see the bordering experience between unexpected fragments. But in these two snapshots taught me something about creation, creativity, artistic elaboration. I started reading a lot of scientific, or actually popularizing science, indeed neuroscience, how the brain works, losses of all sorts, and indeed neuroscience is based on losses. You know, it's what it is about. That gave me some vocabulary, that gave me some categories, that made me feel I was serious about the task, that I still hadn't been devised in its, you know, total clarity. And I used neuroscience, neuroscientific images as crutches to, you know, make my argument go for some time. That I've completely dismantled and abandoned in the final version of the book. Actually, halfway through the new version of the book in Italian, I realized that I didn't need that lingo or those very convenient metaphors, because we're always not speaking of things that you actually see, but of simulations of things here, so of metaphors. I also, you know, realized that literature was strong enough and complex enough and precise enough to speak of itself with no need of other languages. The book changed also in this aspect, in my fierce willingness to defend the dignity of literature as a science in itself, as a form of absolutely fundamental knowledge. So this is how the book was, you know, very, in a way, vaguely taking shape. You know, it was the project seemed very clear from the very beginning. Indeed, it was not. I mean, many clarities succeeded one another along the way. The book was originally written in English because at the Academy I was using the English as a language, and I was still an Italian worker. Back then I was employed in an Italian university, and I thought that writing in English would allow me to, you know, be away from that very stifling academic world I was stuck in. Well, then, you know, the project remained unheeded for years. I mean, I kept thinking of it, and I kept collecting examples. Okay, that's the phase of examples. So yes, you want to write on lacunosity, you want to write on omissions, you want to write on what's not there that should be there. You need evidence. So for years, while I was not really writing chapters or, you know, constructing any argument specifically, I was collecting all sorts of obvious omissions. When I say obvious, I mean deliberate suppressions of textual segments which the reader is expecting. A very, very banal example, but very instructive. Dante's account of, at the beginning of Inferno 21, the pilgrim and his guide, Virgil, are going down a coast in Inferno, and the narrator, whose name is Dante, of course, as the pilgrim and as the author, The narrator tells us, we were going down a coast speaking of things that my comedy doesn't care to report. And that to me was that was a new beginning, because that opened up a whole series of questions that never left me and always actually supported me, even when I felt very, very lost during the construction of what I consider my best thing, really. I mean, or at least my dearest book. Why tell the reader that there should be something that is not there? What's the purpose of informing the reader that he or she is not going to be instructed completely, especially in a poem which purports to be an exhaustive discussion of the secrets of the universe? What would then Dante and Virgil have to talk about? And so on and so forth. That made me realize that there are many more things like this in the Divine Comedy. And there's a little chapter, indeed, on omissions in the Divine Comedy, that it's one of the most original parts of the project that was in English. I remember reading the English part to Daniel Javich, who said, come on, go on, it's lively, keep on doing that. And that, you know, that was probably the first kind of, firm piece of discussion I could hold on to and still believe that the book was on the way. Then, I moved to Oxford. I knew I had this very nice idea. Lacuna was, I could see that everyone I was talking to about this project was reacting positively. Everybody liked that idea. Oh, you want to talk about things that are not there. So people like secrets. That gave me lots of confidence. So in the meantime, I was working on many other things. I did translations, I did novels, I did another essay or two. But Lacuna was always in my mind. Then, I moved to Italian, and I went back to the original notes, and they just looked very naive and just full of good intentions, but with very little juice really in them. There was too much neuroscience, there were mistakes, there were shortcuts that I shouldn't go down. I had to start all over. I moved to Italian. A publisher, Einaudi, liked the project, so I basically, and I sent them the English parts. They liked the English parts, so they just assumed I was going to translate them. But indeed, those English parts, those parts written in English, melted away like snow, really. So the book had to start all over again. But what was nice, and probably all these failures, did actually help the idea to get firmer and stronger in its absoluteness. So there was the problem of then collecting all these examples and categorize them. Not all lacunae are the same, of course. Sometimes things are suppressed for a reason, sometimes the suppression is very limited, sometimes it's very extensive. We're talking about intentional things here, intentional procedures. We're not speaking of incomplete narratives, non finito, or censorship, or even poetry, which of course would lend itself to an easy discussion of lacunosity, blankness, the chopping up of lines. No, I just wanted to work on plots and how plots worked and show how plots functioned really well when they omitted, when they suppressed. So basically, to make a long story short, I analyzed each individual example I had collected, but I kept collecting examples. And I tried to infer whatever more general category that example might be a demonstration of. So you have A, and from A you rise to a higher level, which you call X. So A would be a demonstration of X. But then, that one example is not enough to say that X really exists. So you've got to find other A's, A1, A2, A3. And I did start collecting the other A's that I needed to prove that that category I had inferred from my first example was indeed a category. So, you know, various categories were found. So the omission of a, say, of a part of a dialogue, the omission of the theme of the book, and whatever. Indeed, the structure of the book was never definitive until the proofs, basically, because there was always a more accurate and precise way to deal with the examples. So sometimes an example that I had been pigeonholed as belonging to X, indeed proved to be more productively included under Y. So there was a constant shuffling and reshuffling of some parts till I really thought that, and the publisher kept telling me, why don't you send me some chapters? I can't, but how far are you from the end? I'm close, but everything is open, really. So that gives you a sense of this openness, and I like to think of the book as one object. No, it's a very different book to anything else I'd done before, because, you know, say you want to write, I wrote a very, you know, introductory book on the Renaissance, on how this idea of the Renaissance emerged and blah, blah, blah. I did some research, of course. I also read books that nobody had read for some time, and I tried to be as accurate as possible, but that was easier to do because I was basically describing a category that existed. Here I had to come up with a category, although my enemies say I haven't invented anything. I do think that I have invented something. I mean, that was actually the confidence that supported my work. If I hadn't thought that Lacuna needed to be defined, I wouldn't have written the book. I might have deluded myself, but that's fine. I mean, I'm happy to be self-delusional. That gave me lots of pleasure. So I knew that I was building something new, in a way. I mean, Martino was writing, saying, maybe you told me today even better than, more openly than you did now, but in the end, of course lacuna are there, everybody can see them. You haven't found that much. But the moment you start describing what is under everybody, it's the purloined letter, really. Then you realize the importance of it, you realize how much you neglected that. You've got to make choices. You've got to act in relation to that. So anyway, the book was supposed to become a whole. Not with an H only, but with a W in front of it. a totality where the various wholes, with just one H in front, would actually talk to one another and create a net and mirroring kind of intersections, so that in the end I could get away with lots of murders here, because, of course, a lot could have been included, but I also didn't want a long book. So the structure was fundamental. In the end, I thought I should give an entry, and I mean, describe the word lacuna, what lacuna evokes, the origin of the word. I'm very much affected by the idea of dictionaries. I do work on words a lot. I realize more and more when also one of my characters in a novel was a lexicographer. Anyway, so I describe that word, and I say what that means, where it comes from, and so on and so forth. Who uses it? What's the story of that word? And what's the story that that word will live in my book? Then I try to say what kind of lacunae there are. Lacuna, of course, calls for completion, restoration. You don't have a lacuna without the desire to complete it, to fill it. So I do describe attempts of feeling this, and there's a lot on you know, knowledge restoration through you know, imagination and so on and so forth. And then there are typologies of more specific typologies of lacuna, or even genres that are totally based on the desire to eliminate parts, like the detective story or the short story. Interestingly enough, these are very modern genres, so to say. Lacuna have always existed. Aristotle teaches us, tells us, reminds us that Homer wrote only partial episodes of the Trojan saga. So even a very extended piece of narrative can be very emissive. I mean, we don't read the entire war of the Trojan War. We only read the very end of that conflict, of that very long conflict. So it's not a question of length or duration. But it's, to me, it became more and more clear, and I'm glad that Lina Bolzoni put herself in my shoes and realized that the book changed a lot, and it became ever more ambitious and ever more challenging to the author. Indeed, I like to think that that book had sat on my desk for so many years, which is not like me, I'm quite quick, because I needed to grow stronger to deal with a topic which was too difficult for me when I started it. I mean, I needed to learn more. I needed to write other things. I needed to think a lot. Maybe I didn't think enough. Maybe my enemies will think that I didn't think at all. But again, I think I did think a lot, at least as much as I could, to make this work and to make it mean something to me. And another thing that I discovered at some point was that indeed lacunosity is a paradigm of modernity. Of course, we know that from Benjamin, we know that from many other people, but I wanted to prove it to myself, so I did work on the genre. And to go back to this Proust and Sherlock Holmes, that was it's one of the chapters I like the best in my book, because I've always been a great fan of Proust. I don't consider myself an expert on Proust, but I do know La Recherche quite well, and I was happy to use it, and I do use it a lot in the book. But at one point, I realized that Proust was really using, at least you know, in some of the most paradigmatic passages, a model, a nosological model, which was very close to that of the detective story. Yeah, I mean, at first thought that didn't need to be proven, but then I said, but maybe Proust read Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes indeed figures in La Recherche du Temps Perdu. At one point, Marcel tells Albertine has fled. She left him. He becomes obsessed with her, and he has her chased by his friend Saint-Loup. Albertine realizes that Marcel has put Saint-Loup behind her, after her. So she gets angry, and she writes him a very, very angry letter in which she says, wouldn't it have been easier for you to just tell me, come back? Beautiful letter, very, very moving. Marcel is put on the spot, and he lies. He writes a very mendacious response, which is concluded by the line, ça c'est du Sherlock Holmes. Very disdainful and very contemptuous. Then I started reading the very big correspondence, and Sherlock Holmes is there a few times. I even got, through Mare Magnum, an edition which I think Marcel Proust refers to as crap in a letter to a friend. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. I want to also, I don't know how friendly you are towards me, but and how suspicious you are of this, of what we've been talking about. But I also want you, I'm treating you like friends, I want you to know that it was great fun to write this book. I mean, realizing that Marcel Proust had read Sherlock Holmes was great. This is about, you know, structure, the story of the book. You know, it's a book I'm happy I wrote, and it's finally out. I mean, I could have kept it. Indeed, it was very hard to leave it, to leave it behind. As I said, I'm quite quick. I'm not fetishistic about what I do. When I do it, I like doing it, but I never reread it. I never go back. Actually, I tend to hate what I do after I've done it. I'm sure this book is a book that I will always cherish, and it was really quite sad to say goodbye, because it was with me. It helped me to become a better person, and trying to make the book better, I got happier and happier over the years. And it also mirrors, you know, quite an extensive portion of my life, which covers my departure from Italy, my arrival in Oxford, you know, living up to expectations, probably also in this new place, where indeed I had discussed this book when I was interviewed for the job. So what's your current research? I said, well, I'm writing a book on Lacuna. And I've been in Oxford for 8 years, and the book has just come out. It took a long time. Fiction and reality, yes. I mean, both Martino Marazzi and Lina Bolzoni have described the book, I think, quite well, so there's no need for me to be what the book is about. The book, that's another thing that I had to keep defining and making more and more precise and clear to the reader. This book is not about poetry. This book is not about censorship. This book is not about art. I mean, I really hope that the book will serve as a case study and as a methodological or, you know, a paradigm for others to want to do that. I mean, you can easily apply this to art, music. I mean, omissions are structural devices. You need to have emptiness between pillars to see the temple. So architecture would be a great, but you know, I don't pretend to be an expert on any of these, on all of these fields. Another thing that was very nice during the work of this book, which I'm mentioning just because, not because I want to say that I'm different from everyone. Of course, everyone is different from anybody else, but this book is very different from anything else that I've done. This book was made possible only because it activated so many ancient memories in me also. So, for example, some things had been in my mind forever, like one of the first stories in Joyce's Dubliners, which I do deal with in a little chapter. I hadn't read, I read 30 years ago, and all of a sudden they came back and I said, but that's exactly what I should look up now. So, I mean, I've experienced the pleasure of recollecting and of seeing contemporaneous all the books that I'd read also. I mean, I read massively a very nasty reviewer who was just, you know, willing to destroy the book without really discussing it. Actually, he said that he hadn't even read it openly in this article. Says Gardini hasn't read the books he mentions. No, I have read them, really. I not only have I read all of them, but I also quote a lot of books that I read many years ago. And it was nice to see how this book in the end coalesced from a faithful frequentation of something. So I can't really, that is literature. I can't really say when it was started. It started many years ago. I was telling Martino, but this is the book of my life. He's like, come on, it is the book of my life. I don't want to sound sentimental. I mean, it is really an essay which reflects, you know, my tastes, and also is an X-ray in the end of a reasoning that had started who knows when, and that kept, you know, trying to find the best way to come out. I don't know. Let me. What's the time? Yeah, I mean, you've been very patient. I think I'm gonna stop here. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. Or if you have questions for both Martino. Have I left out any of the observations that you made? No? Thank you very much. Yeah.
That was, I knew coming here that I was going to buy the book, but now I'm so excited to read it. You made a
There are some copies.
Yeah, there are some. I only there are. Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Wow, good for you.
You mentioned you've done a lot of translation, and I work as a translator, and I'm intrigued your story about the English version of this melting away like snow and being replaced by the Italian version. But I'm wondering if your work as a translator informed your thoughts about voids or things that are missing or things that cannot be said, because different languages have capacities to express different things.
Right.
And then different cultures also this idea of, you know, how much, as a writer, can you count on your reader to infer
Right.
languages? So I'm just wondering if that played into it.
No, I don't think I discussed that in the book, but that's with me, absolutely. And a thing I always tell my students at Oxford, it's that languages have got different ways to say things, but also different ways to omit things. And I mean, silences differ in the I mean, silent Chinese is not an Italian, a silent Italian. You know, they keep quiet in different ways. That is, they're keeping something that is not the same thing. You know, so that's absolutely with me, and I'm glad you're bringing this up, because my work as a translator, it has probably also very much fashioned this need to thematize what's left out, which I not necessarily, actually not at all, consider loss, or I mean, forget the. I'm gonna stop talking to you if you mentioned poetry is what gets lost in translation. You know, I mean, basta.
People need to talk about what's gained in translation, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got an amazing gift, the variety of languages. We can't think that. We can't really think that there should be just one language which says everything for everyone. I learn many languages and say many more things, you know. Yeah, no, that's absolutely with me. I've got to think about it, because I think you're giving me a very nice idea to try to work on. But yeah, you know, I was a translator. I am a translator. I mean, the most recent translation came out a few months ago. It was my Catalos. Stefano mentioned that. But I always feel also as a translator that what is unexportable or unreproducible in your mother tongue will be inevitably filled by something else if you're serious about your work. So omissions do bring up other associations. I mean, there is a text. I speak a lot of this idea of a text in the book. You know, a text is a wonderfully orchestrated structure of wholes in the end. But that's how language works. I mean, we do not really use full sonorous bodies, that is words. Words just make us think of things that are not there. That's the point. You know, language is not fullness. Language is emptiness, evocative emptiness. There's no mysticism in my book, so you will be disappointed. I'm happy to reimburse you if you say, but your book is not mystical. No, no, that's another possibility. Another reviewer said that I didn't deal with Arabic mysticism. That was not in my intentions. You write the book on Arabic mysticism. The book is it's a very, you know, Aristotelian book. There's a lot of Aristotle, there's a lot of Plato, there's a lot of, you know, Demetrius was a great expert on rhetoric. Also wanted, what I wanted to do, and this is just completes maybe what Lina actually quite sufficiently expressed, I really wanted to join antiquity and modernity and see, you know, that I didn't say something very important. What I really needed, I wanted to do, was to kind of construct an aesthetics of what's omitted. I mean, we've got many aesthetics. We've got, for example, to me, it was very useful to think that metaphors have served over the centuries as very important, you know, stylistic features or gnoseological paradigms, etc., etc. So I wanted to. There are entire cultures that are metaphorical. Just think of the Baroque, but nobody had ever really collected discussions on omissions, on lacunae. So one of the very first tasks that I gave myself was to look for discussions on it. Did Cicero say anything about it? Did, you know, whoever I might think of. Then it was nice because then my mind worked as a magnet. So it was attracting. And in the end, you develop, maybe, again, it's self-delusion, but you develop a sense of what you really need. And that becomes quite dangerous because it's when research feeds on itself. I mean, it's great, but then, you know, whatever you do, it's great. Anything goes. And that's another risk, of course, because then so you always have to step back a bit and say, am I still fresh and lucid and, you know, kind of rigorous as my topic demands of me? So it was great discipline, really. I don't know how it came out. I'm happy with it. But some readers may say, oh, no, it's just incoherent or too lacunose, too defective. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Altre domande? Yes?
Could you go a bit more into the idea of the association between realism and lacuna that all three of you mentioned?
Yes. Yeah. I start well, at some point, I try to stay away from critical sources. So I was absolutely aware of, I mean, two sources of course, I had to tackle. One was Auerbach, and the other one was Lukács. Thank you.
We've read the book.
Okay, they read the book.
We read the book.
But I try, this is also a piece of, you know, militant criticism in a way. I'm very anti-theory. I mean, not a priori, but, you know, there's a lot of misuse, I think, of imported paradigms. I think that theory stems from the object and of observation. I mean, every individual calls for special and specialistic description. So anyway, all I said about realism in the end stemmed from my own reading. It's very hard to say what's yours and what's others, because also I've read so many books in my life that, I mean, in the end I might have been quoting someone else without knowing. But going back to Dante, it's obvious that Dante, most of the time, I mean, whenever he tells us he's omitting something, he is prompting the reader to want to believe that there's more, that there's more than you actually have, than you actually find in the text, which is, of course, an illusion. I mean, the text is the text. It's all you have. But by saying to you, we talked about other things that I don't care to report, you automatically think that there's more, and that what you get is ipso facto real. So you take it as real, as defectively real, and what is there is exactly, ontologically, objectively, of the same matter of what is not there, which is false, of course. It's an illusion. So the omissions make you think that what you get is a part of a totality that you are deprived of. That lack, that sense of deprivation prompts you to want to know more, and you enter and you become an addict, because at that point you need to know more, and you start interpreting. I mean, you enter the realm of endless interpretation. Now, every great author does that. Every great narrator does that, and the engine of telling rests, I mean, it feeds on such deprivations, which you can interpret in many ways. They can just be lies, and they can, you know, like you tell a kid, if you're good, I'm going to give you something. Whether the kid is good or bad, he will or she will never get what mom said. So, and he or she will keep waiting for the good thing that was promised. So it's a promise that will always make you want what's promised, but that will never arrive. But so it may just be a cruel way to deal with the other person, with the other person's mind. But as Adorno, you know, the philosopher, says, it's also giving the other person the liberty to decide what he or she wants, or what he or she thinks. So at one point I opened Adorno, Minima Moralia, and that was again another great moment of during the work of this book, because I said Adorno must be saying something about Lacuna. I open Adorno, I read a bit, and indeed there is a whole chapter entitled Lacuna, with a K. Lacuna. But it was fantastic. And he says something beautiful, because he says, let's not give everything to the reader. The reader needs to do it himself. Of course, Adorno is giving also political meaning to omission. He wants everybody to think with their minds. And then, of course, there's this collaboration between the reader and so the reader. You make the reader want to believe you if you don't tell her or him everything. At that moment, even Stephen King, who's quite a good storyteller, Stephen King, there's a nice actually essay on writing by him. I didn't quote him. It would have been too pop. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is fine, but not more than that. Not yet. But there's a very nice essay which I recommend on writing, where he says, I'm not going to tell you how I hardly ever tell you how my women dress, because I want you to dress them up. At that point, I mean, they will become your friends or your characters. So by omitting, and you wouldn't think that Stephen King omits a lot, because his books are this thick, always. I mean, you make the other person think more, and there's a pleasure there, and that's the pleasure of knowing. That's what Aristotle actually thematizes and conceptualizes in the rhetoric, and that will be taken up by others. Barthes will say the same thing, but so many others. Actually, I've just come across a good quote, which too bad I hadn't found before, in Cicero's Partitiones Oratorie. He says, if you want to create magniloquence, I mean amplificatio, just enumerate things with just commas, because enumeration, which is of course never complete, it's incomplete by definition, will suggest amplification. That's how then you build the reality, and you want to believe that what you're reading is actually true. Even if it's science fiction can work wonderfully well as reality if there are enough omissions.
Bene, vi ringrazio molto per la discussione, brillante come ci aspettavamo. And I remind you that there are just very few copies of the book upstairs for sale, and if you want, I think Nicola will sign them for you. Thank you all again very much.
Thank you.